What is the goal of any video game? Frankly, that depends on who you ask. If you ask a publisher, they will tell you it is to make money. If you ask a player, they will tell you it is to have fun. If you ask a developer, they will likely tell you a story about an artistic vision they want it to bring to life. That's something I want to focus on today, because the developer's vision for a game is often grand and spectacular. They want to tell an immersive, interactive story. They want to create a world that feels lived in and real. They want to create a universe so expansive and varied no two players could ever possibly have the same experience. They want to bring immersion to the player in a way that's almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Or in the case of today's game, the developer simply wanted to make a lot of things blow up at once. Treasure is a hidden gem in the game development world. If you know, you know. But most people don't know. While they haven't released a game in almost a decade, they spent the 90s and aughts releasing games that never sold well, but to those who played them, absolute master classes in the genres they covered. Titles such as Gunstar Heroes, Guardian Heroes, Sin and Punishment, Radiant Silvergun, and Ikaruga built up a dedicated cult following over the years. In the mid-90s, while development was finishing on Guardian Heroes, Treasure programmer Mitsuru Yaida was struck by a memory of a game they had played growing up. A memory of a game that featured countless bullets on screen. While they could never remember the exact game, common belief is that it was Hover Attack, a 1984 home computer game featuring a lot of bullets. But in the modern era of 1996, so much more could be done. And this was truly a modern problem that required a modern solution. So Treasure prototyped a game featuring hundreds of 2D sprites and fast, score-chasing gameplay. With the prototype complete, Treasure set out to find the modern answer to the age-old question: how many bullets and explosions can I fit on screen without crashing the hardware? Bangai-O was the answer to this question, and it would eventually release on the Nintendo 64 in 1999. This game featured explosions galore, a ludicrous story, fast-paced arcade gameplay, and only a small 10,000 copy run in Japan due to the publisher feeling the game had extremely limited appeal. But Treasure wasn't done with Bangai-O yet. They felt they had the base of something incredible, and over the next 3 months redid the art, improved the music, tweaked the gameplay mechanics, and made the overall experience even bigger and more explosive, culminating in a re-release on the next-generation Sega Dreamcast hardware in late 1999. This is the version that would eventually reach North America, and what will be spinning up in my Dreamcast today. Was Treasure right? Did they have something special on their hands? Was Bangai-O the explosive push Treasure had been looking for? Let's find out. One of the first things to get out of the way with Bangai-O is that this game is silly. It knows that everything else is simply set dressing to the main event, the explosions. There's a beyond paper-thin plot here about a sci-fi gang encroaching on some sci-fi planet or another. The plot follows two siblings taking up arms in a stolen mech to kill them all. But what follows is completely nonsensical and aiming for an extremely specific brand of Japanese humor. This isn't a bad thing. It can be funny, and the bizarre characters, the poorly translated speeches they make, and the outlandish setups and punchlines can make for an interesting distraction. But the game knows that's all it is. These distractions can quite literally be turned off in the menus if you want to never have to read a single dialogue bubble in the entire game. Even here in this video, this plot is simply a distraction from the main event. Bangai-O is a game about explosions, not the plot. So what does playing an explosion generator feel like? I would best describe Bangai-O as a 2D side-scrolling bullet hell multi-directional shooter. That's a mouthful, and might not entirely make sense. Bangai-O takes a risk in an era where developers were finally coming to terms with 3D graphics and starting to see what they could push out there. Even on the Dreamcast in 1999, games such as Shenmue were pushing the envelope of photorealism in video games. These were insanely good graphics for the era, I promise. Bangai-O being a 2D game, operating on sprites and sprites alone, was a risk. People wanted slick new graphics, and a game such as this looked, well, retro. And several critics of the era were unkind to the game as a result. There of course was a reason for this, and it's twofold. Firstly, one of the core gameplay tenets Treasure held for this game was to make sure there was constantly an almost overwhelming amount of things happening on screen. And even in 2D, that could push the hardware of the time pretty hard. Even the almighty Dreamcast was seemingly brought to its knees by Bangai-O in its biggest moments, with the game slowing down when things get absolutely bonkers. Secondly, this was simply Treasure's wheelhouse. The team working on this was coming off working with the Sega Saturn, a system notorious for struggling with 3D, but excelling at 2D. This was just Treasure playing to their strengths. Another strength of Treasure's, and subsequently Bangai-O itself, is that the game plays a lot like a bullet hell shooter. What exactly is a bullet hell shooter? Bullet hells are typically games that are all about precision movement to avoid getting hit by enemy fire when the screen is almost entirely covered in their bullets. Most bullet hell games play to the idea that one bullet will kill you. Bangai-O is not like that. You can take a number of bullets before you die, and you can actually restore health as the levels go on depending on your performance. But something that caught me off guard here is that while most games in this genre give you a brief moment of invincibility when you get hit to try and get your bearings back, Bangai-O has no such forgiveness. While you can take upwards of 10 shots before your mech gets destroyed, you can, and will experience over your time with the game many moments where placing yourself poorly for 1/10 of a second will instantly kill you. How do you defend yourself from this? The titular mech in the game is capable of firing both missiles and lasers in all directions. Any bullets your fire touches are negated and can no longer harm you. Lasers bounce off walls and can be used very effectively to manage your protection in tight spaces, while missiles hone in on nearby enemies, tracking them and doing significant damage before they can even get a chance to hurt you. While this is all pretty standard, where the mechanics really get interesting is the mech's special move. Most bullet hell games have something to the effect of a screen-clearing bomb you can use in moments of desperation to protect yourself, but you're given very few and have to stash it for emergencies. Bangai-O treats this a little differently. Depending on if you're playing the N64 version or the Dreamcast edition, your special move gets charged up differently depending on your actions. On the N64, collecting fruit from fallen enemies will do the trick, or on the Dreamcast, simply causing any kind of damage will fill the meter. As a result, you'll often find yourself with up to 5 charges of the move that you can use in rapid succession, and its effectiveness depends entirely on how much immediate danger you're in. When you pull the trigger to activate your special, you unleash anywhere from 40 to 400 rounds in all directions, causing massive damage and generally protecting yourself from immediate harm. The more danger you're in, the more missiles or lasers are unleashed, encouraging you to play a game of chicken with the enemy and waiting till the absolute last possible second to defend yourself. When you can pull off a 400 shot counter, it's a pretty spectacular visual display, with the game slowing down as sprites and explosions cover the screen in a fireworks show to behold. Of course, time it wrong and your attack may peter out, or you can find yourself dead in an instant. It takes several levels for this mechanic to click and really make sense. Once you figure it out, it's extremely satisfying to see the destruction you can leave in your wake. One thing that has to be said about controlling your mech and flying around these levels is the control scheme. For some reason, the default control scheme has you controlling the mech with the Dreamcast D-pad, but you can only shoot in the direction you're facing and angle the shot using one of the face buttons. Frankly, this renders the game almost entirely unplayable beyond the first few levels. If you find yourself one lonesome day putting Bangai-O into your Dreamcast, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that you immediately change the control scheme to the second option available, which allows you to fire directionally independent of your movement. Making this change will really improve the feel, and the game will start to show its true colors as an intense score-chasing experience, all the way down to you putting in your high score initials before you start the game. Each of Bangai-O's 44 levels presents you with a map you need to navigate, locate the boss, and then murder within a time limit. I cannot say at any point in the game I actually felt the time limit, so I guess just navigate the level and murder the boss. Some levels feature pretty straightforward travel to get to the boss, Several feature gimmicks around the weapons, or even puzzles you need to time right and solve or risk trapping yourself and being unable to complete the level. While there's 44 levels, there's significantly less variety in the bosses. Once you reach the end of the stage, it feels like there's maybe 7 actual bosses, and at least half the stages the boss is simply a stationary object that doesn't even fire at you. Regardless, as you start to understand the game, there's a zen-like flow to it and you just want to keep going. Just one more stage. A better run at that last level. A new high score you can achieve. The hours can just melt away in a hurry. I'm not exaggerating when I say some of my play sessions in this game I walked away from having been gripping the controller so hard, focused so deeply on doing the best I possibly could, that my thumbs would be shaking and locked in a bent position. As unhealthy as that is, it's also extremely high praise for the game. Bangai-O sets out to do a simple arcade game challenging you to survive sci-fi hell and happily destroy all of it along the way. It somehow just casually enthralls the player in its simple pleasures and challenges so deeply, you'll ignore bodily harm to keep going. Buyer beware, I suppose. An initial run from start to finish of the game will take most players around 6 hours until they reach the final boss, and then they will spend the next year trying to beat him. This last level takes about 4 minutes to get to the final boss, and then he will often kill you within 2 seconds of the start of the fight. It comes down to being both a skilled and lucky player to get to the credits. Once you beat him, the final cutscene plays by so quickly it's impossible to actually read the revelations. Spoiler warning, here's the first part of the game's nonsensical final cutscene. Get all that? Good, because as I said earlier, the story doesn't matter in this game. Not one bit. You're here to cause explosions and rack up high scores, and that's exactly what will keep you coming back to this game over and over again. Sales data on this game was pretty hard to come across, and I could only find one source that is no longer online, and I had to rely on a forum user copy-pasting the data from the website, so take this with a large grain of salt. But it would appear Bangai-O is not the sales juggernaut they hoped it would be, moving just over 14,000 copies in its lifespan. Subsequently, with its quality and low print run, we find ourselves once again looking at a game that's perceived value is higher than it should be, with copies currently moving for approximately $130. That didn't stop Treasure though. Bangai-O received a sequel on the Nintendo DS that introduced new ideas to the formula, but once again, was not a big seller. Finally, the series was last seen on the 360 arcade in the form of Bangai-O HD, featuring a number of new ideas but some sprite work and modeling that really left a lot to be desired. Unfortunately, this game can no longer be purchased as of 2021 and interested parties will have to be content with the demo. None of this has been enough to stop Treasure. While they haven't released any games since 2014's Geist Crusher in Japan, they have recently been teasing a return to a highly requested title for their 30th anniversary. As someone who has enjoyed so many of their games over my life, I cannot wait to see what Treasure has up their sleeve next. And until then, you can find me chasing scores in this Dreamcast gem.